Greetings, everybody, and welcome to our continuing journey through the 21 Laws of Leadership with John Maxwell. I am not John Maxwell. I am Lee McCroskey, covering for John Maxwell because I'm a lot cheaper to get me explaining his laws than to actually invite him online. So for those of you who tuned in thinking that John Maxwell was going to be doing this today, you're incorrect. You're sorely disappointed. But let's go ahead. If you've got notes ready, we're going to talk about a law that's very simple. It's more something to be aware of this week than something to necessarily act on. So sometimes you get really good ideas from Dimitri where he says, okay, here's 5 things you can do. Here's 8 steps to, making progress or having success. That's great. Mine probably won't follow that track this week because it's a concept. So it's the law of magnetism. Number 9, the law of magnetism. And I'm going to give you the punchline right at the beginning. Okay? Here it is. This is it. I'm not teasing you with any kind of a build up to where the big idea. I'm going to give it to you right off the bat. And that is this. Maxwell says, who you are, write this down. Who you are is who you attract. Who you are is who you attract. And that's an important thought. So here's what I want you to do. Since many of you have writing utensils, take a moment and do this. Think, do you know who you would like to work with? I mean, look around at your fellow teammates, the people in your office, the folks you work with, your fellow booking buddies. Okay, take a look at them and think, what's your profile of a perfect team member at LGFG? What kind of profile would they have? What qualities would they possess? And write them down. Just jot down a few. Some of you might write down, I want somebody to be positive. I want somebody to be coachable. I want somebody, last night when I was talking to Rachel Gibbings and that whole team in Australia, she said, I want somebody that's invested, meaning committed. So write those down. I'll give you 5 more seconds. Write down at least 3 qualities in a profile of a perfect team member. Okay? And don't just think of like qualities. We're going to talk about other things too, like ages. Do you care if they're in their 20s? I mean, does everybody that works in our business have to be in their 20s or 30s? No, I'm older than that. So think about age groups. We'll talk about that. But make a list of the qualities you'd like people on your team. All right? Now, here's another important thought. I have little stars by these in my notes, so you can write this down. What you get is not determined by what you want. What you get is not determined by what you want. It's determined by who you are. It's determined by who you are, right? So think about that. This applies to relationships outside of work. I mean, I think back to early in my life, when I was spending a lot of time as a university student, well, I was playing in the rock band. So what type of people was I associating with early in my life? Probably not people I would want to emulate. But because of the culture of rock and roll and what we were doing all the time, you tended to attract people that were part of that culture. And so my parents were always worried about what was happening. Oh my gosh, he's playing rock music. Oh, but anyway, it worked out and I turned out okay, I think. But this law of attraction, this law of magnetism applies to relationships. If you're not happy with the people that you've dated so far, it's up to you. You have to be aware of yourself because you will attract not the type of person you want, but it's who you are. Okay, so I hope I've drilled that in. So one goal in a business like we're in is to find people who believe what we believe in terms of values and principles. They've got to have grit, they've got to have commitment, all that. But it's important that they have different thoughts. Maxwell says that you've got to value that diversity in thinking, that creativity to look at things from different angles, willing to challenge the norms. But you want to have the same bedrock. My wife and I are like that. We have the same principles, same values. Now, we think differently. We have different personalities. Okay, that's good to an extent. When I worked at Southwestern, Dan Moore was the president. We agreed on our values. We agreed on the principles. We agreed on what we were trying to accomplish. But I felt like a lot of times I was his foil. I was always trying to think differently. Like, well, I'm not going to just sit and agree with you to agree with you. I'm going to come at it in a different way. So there's that dynamic tension between having the right kind of foundational bedrock, but also valuing diversity in thought. So, law of magnetism. Now, I got to make one little comment. The law of magnetism is not like necessarily The Secret. A lot of you've read that, sort of how to draw power or fame or whatever you focus on, you bring into your life. That is not what John Maxwell's talking about at all. It's a little bit different, a little bit subtle. So one big thought that I really like from Maxwell in this chapter is that effective leadership begins where? You're right. It begins with yourself. So if you improve yourself, you will attract better people, right? So always it comes back to us as leaders. We've got to grow. We've got to develop. And then we're going to attract people. We will, like a magnet, we'll draw them into our lives. And you'll be more excited about work and you'll be more productive at the same time. Carlos Santana. Some of you like quotes. How many of you know Carlos Santana? Okay, well, not many, but he's the guy. He's a great guitarist, Hispanic guy, and he wrote a ton of hits. Go Google him, Santana. You'll recognize his music. Oye, como va? Yeah. All right. Here's what he said. You're like, well, how does Carlos Santana tie into what we're talking about? I liked one of his quotes. He says, "Your mind is like a magnet. You don't attract what you need. You don't attract what you want. You attract who you are." And he said, and I love who I am. So look, success. You can become a great guitarist also. All right. So one other example before I continue our little journey here. Maxwell talks about this law of magnetism will impact your team. And they have certain characteristics that you see come to the surface. If you look at your team, you'll probably find out that you and the people that follow you, if you're in management, share common ground. And I think this is true for LGFG, but there's 4 or 5 areas he talks about. Just hear this. You don't have to write it down. One is attitude. I would say we have a common ground when it comes to attitude. We have attracted, like magnets, people into the company that have a positive outlook, that work hard, that take their job seriously, that are entrepreneurs. That entrepreneurial mindset. That's all part of attitude. So you will notice you tend to attract people that are like you in terms of attitude. Second, generationally speaking, in terms of age, a lot of companies have a generational, they're generationally homogenous. Okay, I kind of made that up. They're the same age. How about that? So lots of people in LGFG, they're in their 20s, in their 30s, a couple folks older than that. But by and large, it's a youthful organization, and that's fine. The magnet works that way too. We attract people that are like us. Background is another area. Socio-culturally speaking, we tend to attract similar people. Maxwell talks about that. I've always also mentioned values. Values are real key, and I think even personalities are attracted. Whenever I watched teams being recruited, you could always look to the leader, the recruiter, the manager, and their team by and large was a reflection of them. And they ended up, after working together for some time, sounding alike, talking alike, using the same mannerisms. You could almost say, "Is your manager so-and-so?" And they go, "Yeah, how did you know?" Because they've magnetized people that are like them. Like you'll see a driver at the top, like let's say Dimitri, who is that? The commander will also attract people like him and keep him and stay with him. So that makes sense. Amiables will attract amiables. So those values and personalities are a big part. The last thing that Maxwell mentions on team characteristics is life experience. Again, we're going to attract a certain type of person into the business, which are entrepreneurial, sales oriented. So that's key. And I would say this too, lid levels. You tend to, like a magnet, attract people that are of a similar lid level. I know my first few teams when I was recruiting some years ago, if I were, let's say, a 7 or an 8 in terms of my lid level in leadership, it was easy for me to attract followers that were like 5s and 4s. And that's what I did. Now, here was the catch in me recruiting down my lid level in terms of team characteristics, because I recruited below me with people that weren't as developed as leaders or as confident. I spent a lot of time coaching them, managing them, motivating them, trying to get them to go to work. Oh gosh, here's some more tissues. I know you're crying again this week. It's okay. We can do. So I spent a ton of management energy trying to lift those people's lids. Now here's the other catch. It's when I recruited people that challenged me, like if I was an 8 and I recruited 8s to go along with me, my job suddenly became easier. So I would encourage you, this is kind of a little tangent on the law of magnetism, to look for people who intimidate you. If you're thinking about bringing somebody on board or asking them to go through the training at LGFG, look for people who are just as confident, if not more so than you. Because if you get somebody that's a high lid level in leadership, they will do well in spite of your training and management. Those are the people you want. Okay, on to other topics. So law of magnetism, here's another point. People like those they're like. Okay? People like people who are like them. So here's a simple way to write that down. Likes, like likes. You've heard me say that. Likes, like likes. People like people who are like them. So we're going to talk next week about the law of connection and how to connect with people quickly and how to become like them, to make them like you so that you will connect. But it's important, besides attracting people, to think about who you spend your time with. Earlier, I mentioned about my youthfulness and my friends. Well, I didn't give any heed to a little quote from the Bible. Proverbs 13:20 says this about the law of magnetism. You're like, what? Really? Yeah. It says, whoever walks with the wise becomes wise, but the companion of fools will suffer harm. Okay, so whoever walks with the wise will become wise, will lift each other's lids. And you want to attract wise people into your life. But the companion of fools, if you choose your friends poorly, you'll suffer harm. And I did. And I'll tell you a story sometimes, if you want, when we're together. All right, so people come together because of mutual attraction, this magnetism. Mutual vision, mutual commitment, mutual contribution, mutual expectations. Those are all, they combine to form what this law is all about. Now, a couple other thoughts here which may be of use to you, and I want you to think just a little bit. Going back to a comment I made a minute ago, this is important. The first responsibility, Maxwell says, is not to lead people, it's to find people. Okay, so good, write that down. The first responsibility is not to lead people, because everybody's like, I want to be a leader, I want to run stuff, or I want to be in management. But the key is to find those good people and bring them on board. And you can either be, if they're great people, you can be a crappy manager to some extent, and they'll still do well because they'll figure it out. Think about people in our business who've done that. You can, all right? And people, corollary to that is people learn more from people that they like. Okay? It's true. All right. So let's kind of wind down. Remember this, likes, like likes. We'll talk about that next week. Look for, discover things that you have in common to build up that law of magnetism. We'll talk more about that too next week. But the better leader you are, this is big, the better leader you are, the better leaders you'll attract. That is a thought I want you to take away from this. The better leader you are, the better leaders that you will attract. And it follows that if you improve yourself, you will attract better people into the organization. We want that. We want to grow. And I think if some of you are like, well, I don't recruit. I'm here to do my deal. You will attract better clients if you're a better leader. Okay? Now, this may all happen on a subconscious level, but I believe that the law of magnetism for Maxwell also works with clients. The better you are as a leader, the better the clients that you will attract, and they will become repeat clients. Good. So, couple truths. We'll wind up. I'll leave you with a couple quotes. Every leader has a measure of magnetism, Maxwell says. Okay? And a leader's magnetism may impact others in different ways. Magnetism isn't good. It's not bad. It depends on what the leader does with it. I thought specifically, probably because my wife and I have just watched a 6-hour documentary on Auschwitz, that horrible concentration camp during World War II. I mean, wow, we learned a lot and we left depressed after each session. But anyway, if you looked at Himmler, Eichmann, the guy named Haas, who ran the concentration camp at Auschwitz, certainly Hitler, they had tremendous magnetism. They had, to a great degree, high lid levels. But who did they attract? They attracted fellow people who were evil. They had no scruples, didn't value human life in the least. Their whole culture in the Nazi regime was obviously horribly twisted. But just the law of magnetism works, and you can use it for good or for bad. Now, I know that doesn't apply to you guys because you're not out there, let's do evil this week. You're not thinking about that. But I just want you to get this notion in your head. I remember, too, probably a better example is some years ago, there was an electronics company here in the States called Sharp. That was the name of the company, like Pioneer or whatever. Think of one. But Sharp was the name of the company, and I loved their motto. It said, from sharp minds come sharp products. And I think that's true. That works for us. That works for LGFG. That works for the law of magnetism. All right? So, a couple quick thoughts to wrap up. Number one, this is one I want you to think about and talk about because it's weird. Makes you think. Remember, it's far more powerful to be interested than interesting. Get it? It's far more powerful to be interested than interesting. The way our Australia friends translated this yesterday was they felt like the more everybody spends all their time trying to be an interesting person, go to a party. Hey, look how interesting I am. Somebody come talk to me. I want to talk about myself. Everybody wants to be interesting, but the way to be interesting is to be interested. That's how they translated it. So Yana said, if you're with the client and you're super interested in them, then you will be interesting and they will be drawn to you. Law of magnetism. So I want you to think about that. Am I being interested in people around me? That service orientation, or am I just trying to be interesting? Just hoping somebody thinks I'm cool. All right. So last two thoughts. If you look at the people you've been attracting, you find out a lot about yourself. Okay? Take stock of the people around you, your friends and your social circle, the people you work with. If you look at the people you've been attracting into your life, it's like a mirror looking back at yourself so you can take stock. And to wrap up, Emerson, famous American philosopher, said this: who you are thunders so loudly, I cannot hear what you say. Did you catch it? Think about that. Who you are thunders so loudly, I cannot hear what you say. Your example shines through no matter what you say with your mouth. The type of person you are, your lid level, your leadership level comes to the forefront. Okay? So we are wrapping up. I'm going to send you a few questions to kind of do a review of what we started with. Maybe you can talk about those in your groups. And if there are people who missed this tremendous recording, be sure to pass it on. Maybe I'll get better lighting next time, so I'm not quite as bright and pale with my skylights, but what the heck, I moved to a new location, thought I'd try it out. All right, everybody, you have a great week. I do want to ask one question since I'm slightly ahead of schedule here. If there's anybody that has a comment or input or an example or an anecdote, hit the unmute button and tell us about that now. Okay? Anybody? Once. Going twice. Okay. Good. Well, thanks for tuning in. We will do this again next week. We're going to talk about the law of connection, right? Thank you. Carry on.